So you get the Kaepernick video that's on the cover of Time magazine this week, whether he should play a role here in keeping the calm, and others like him. Gianna Caldwell joins us. We got Jamu Green, Joe Piscopo. Jenna, what do you make of that? That there's added pressure to reach out to a different type of community to urge calm. Politicians aren't getting it done. Maybe this gang can.
Yeah, and you know what? I first want to say Fox News' very own Ebony K. Williams was impacted by this because she grew up in Charlotte and she has family and friends there, so I'm sure she has a historical knowledge she can provide. But this situation, I tell you, I'm heartbroken by it, Neil, for a number of reasons. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And in this situation where the details of an investigation had not been released yet, we haven't seen any tape, people are literally destroying their communities. Where Kaepernick comes in, I think that this is an opportunity for an individual who has a large platform in the NFL to go to that community and stress that there needs to be calm and there needs to be a resistance to violence, because what we saw last night was just, it was unbelievable. And it's unfortunate that we saw that, and we continue to see incidents like that, those situations where they're trying to throw a photographer in fire. But we need people to step up to the plate and show what this country is all about and unite this community and heal them.
Jamu, what do you think?
Well, I certainly think that whether it's Kaepernick or anyone who has a significant media platform, that they can both call for peaceful protests, and there were many peaceful protesters last night, and at the same time demand accountability against excessive force by these individual police officers. And I think, Neil, one of the most important things that has to happen, and we're not seeing, is that we have this conversation outside of these isolated individual incidents where each time one of these shootings happens, everyone focuses on, okay, what are the specifics of this individual case? What the rage that Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jackson, was talking to you about, it's not about one isolated case. It's about the totality of this. It is about a daily fear that African American men have when dealing with the police. And we can all agree that if police officers respect all communities equally, and if the black community respects police officers, we would be a safer place.
Well, there's no doubt about that, Jimmy, but I see the rage of these 680 cases of an officer shooting a black individual. Only a fraction of them were unjustified in retrospect, and looking at the video cams and all. Some are famous for being quite justified. But having said that, I'm just wondering why there isn't the same rage for the thousands of such black-on-black killings going on, for example, in Chicago. Joe, I think that's something that we all have to wrestle with, because it is a double standard.
Yeah, Neil, you know, I'm the spokesperson for the proud spokesperson for the Boys and Girls Clubs in New Jersey. I've walked the streets of some pretty tough areas in the Garden State, you know, and walking down Camden, New Jersey, and you walk down and you see, and it looks like Afghanistan, and you say, how could these good folks, these nice people, our citizens, our fellow citizens, how could they be abandoned? You can't help but, you know that a rage is going to come out of that. You got to bring jobs back in there. You got to help out. You got to reach out. I just don't feel that the politicians care. It's time for business to come in and create an environment, and you can't keep blaming whether there's one bad incident or another bad incident of a police officer shooting somebody. The police are our first line of defense, as we found out this past weekend in New York and New Jersey with those terror attacks.
Well, there's no doubt about that, but Gianna, by the same token, then we unfairly wrap all the underprivileged and the poor when we surmise that, with just a slight provocation, they're going to get violent. I also agree with Jamu that most of the people who were there, by far, were peacefully demonstrating, and others took it out of control. But what do you think of that notion that economically we tend to go back to that and blame it on that?
Well, you know what? I'm from Chicago, Neil, and I can tell you, kind of to your last question, Joe, you know, we see local rage. It just doesn't catch fire nationally when things happen in Chicago, when there's violence, black on black violence. But I understand the assessment by many that if there was a greater economic engine in the African American community in places like Chicago, then perhaps you wouldn't see violence and protest. And I think that that's a false narrative for this reason and this reason only. As a young fella, you know, we didn't grow up with much. We grew up in poverty. We grew up on the south side of Chicago. Lights, gas, and water was perhaps off at the same time, but we learned how to treat adults. We learned how to treat police, and those were some of those manners in which we gleaned very early. And just because there was an economic opportunity there, or we didn't have the money that most other
That's
folks
a good
had,
point. Jimmy, what do you think of that? That sometimes you have to,
balanced.
you know, say protest, but don't go too far. What's the best advice?
Look, I think that there's certainly a need for a greater focus on economic opportunities in the inner cities, but we also have to keep in mind that the media and our culture plays into what we are seeing in many ways, and it's also a part of brain science and how we process images. If we grow up, whether you are black, white, brown, anything, if you grow up with very negative images of African American men being fed to you, if the news, when they focus on criminals, puts a preponderance of attention on African American men, then a police officer is going to be quicker to react to what might be a cell phone, what might be a book, than he would be with another population. And so we have to address implicit bias, and that's the retraining.
Yeah, I agree with Jamil.